Okay, so we're going to take a look at our salt. We're getting ready to mix up our meat. If you might remember here, we actually want our curing salt at a 0.6% to 0.2% sodium nitrite. Okay, so that's important. And now we need to figure out what does that mean to our cuts of meat. So the first thing we have to figure out is what ratio do we need to get 6.25% nitrite of our curing salt down to this range of 0.6 to 0.2% sodium nitrite. So we're going to do a little quick math on that. We're just going to walk you through it step by step here really quick. So we need a curing salt at 6.25% nitrite to be cut by how much in order to get 0.3% nitrite as our goal. That leaves us a little buffer there for math errors or measuring errors, right? And so what that means, if we put that into mathematical terms, is our 6.25% nitrite needs to be cut by how much, x, the unknown, to equal 0.3% nitrite. So if we walk through the math on that, we start with this equation. The first thing we do, since we have x here, is we multiply both sides by x. Whatever you do to 1/2 the equation, you have to do the other, right? Just a reminder on your math. So this becomes 6.25%, and that equals 0.3% times x. So then the next thing we have to do is we want to move this 0.3 over here, get x by itself. So we divide both sides by 0.3. So 6.25 divided by 0.3 equals x all by itself. We do the math on that, and I changed the sides on here. I just flip-flopped our equation, but it ends up being the same. X equals 20.83. That's all great, but what does that mean? That means that to cut our nitrite in our curing salt, we need it to be only about 1/20th or 1/21st, one part out of 20 or one part out of 21 to our mix. So this actually works out okay. One part out of 21 was, of course, give us a lower number and put us right next to this 0.3% nitrite in our entire salt. If we go with 1/20th, that works out pretty nicely because that leaves us a little bit of a buffer, and no problem there, so that we can move on. Okay, so we want about 1/20th of our total salt to be our curing salt, and that will put us in the ballpark of 0.3% nitrite in our total mix. So now we have two pieces of meat. We have two pieces of meat we're going to be working with today. One is an 8.5 pound chunk, and the other is 6.1 pounds. All right, that's a fair bit. So our sodium that we're looking at for our amount, we wanted to be somewhere in this 2.4 to 2.7 grams per pound of meat, right? 2.4 to 2.7 grams. So if we choose 2.5 grams of salt, one piece of meat will need a total of 21.25 grams of salt, and the other piece, the 6.5 pound, at 2.5 grams per pound, will need 15.25 grams of salt. Now remember, this is our total salt. We need to put pink curing salt in there at a ratio of approximately 1/20th or 0.05 out of the 21.25. So what that means is 21.25 times 0.05, and over here it's 15.25 times 0.05, and that gives us 1.0625 grams of curing salt with a total amount of salt of 21.25. And over here it gives us 0.7625 grams of curing salt out of a total of 15.25 total salt. So if you want to measure these separately, what you would, if you want to measure your total salt, your regular table salt or your kosher salt, whatever you're using, and your curing salt separately, you're going to need to do one measurement, subtract it from your 21.25, right? So in this case, we'd be in the ballpark of our kosher salt would be at about 20.2 right? Approximately 20.2. Sorry, yes, 20.2 grams of kosher salt or table salt or whatever you're using, pickling salt, and 1.0625 of pink curing salt. Now we left ourselves a little buffer, and I don't have a scale that goes down to this fine. I don't think anybody's going to have a household scale. Maybe somebody out there works in a lab and has one of these. But on Amazon, you can get these fabulous little scales here that'll go down to the hundredths of a gram, so the 1.06. We left ourselves a little buffer on our nitrate percentage to make sure we're above that 0.2%. Leave us a little room for error, and so that's actually going to work out just fine. So what we can do is on the scale, we'll measure out our 1.06 grams of salt, and then we will add our kosher salt or table salt or whatever until we reach 21.25, and that will be complete for our 8.5 pounds of meat. Clear? All right. So with that, yeah. So that's basically our salt, and that's what we're going to do. So with regards to our salt, I was checking out the Morton's canning and pickling salt. Just the taste that on the tongue, it activates everything all at once. That's fine, but I think I'm going to go with the coarse ground kosher salt for the sake of it dissolving a little more slowly and making that osmosis process of getting the water out of the meat and then back in go a little more gradually. Maybe that's a good idea, maybe that's a bad idea, but I'm thinking it might be able to penetrate more deeply into the meat as far as the liquid exchange if the salt remains on the farthest external part of the meat a little bit longer. Maybe I'm thinking backwards about that, but like I said, this is my first time doing this, so it's a fun experiment, and we're going to see what happens with that. All right, so I was doing this project a little bit last minute, and so I needed some pink curing salt for this. And well, this is what I found in my local grocery store. It's Rocky Mountain Wild Trout brine mix, and they have them for all sorts of different things. Anyway, this doesn't have MSG or anything in the seasoning packet, but here is the awesome part of this. It contains, if we can focus on that, it contains one brine packet and then one curing packet that is 18 grams. So if we open this up, this is our curing packet, and what that is pink curing salt at 6.25% sodium nitrite. And if you look at the ingredients here for your curing ingredients, it contains salt and then sodium nitrite at 6.25%. And that's this little guy right here. It's going to be our friend. The rest of this is the rest of the seasoning mix for brining the trout. And it's got, sugar and some seasonings and a fairly clean list of ingredients, which is nice. We will not be using this today. I might use that on something else when I'm cooking up a little tilapia. But for today, what we really need is our magical pink curing salt. I'm going to borrow 2 bowls from my son's collection of eating utensils here. And we might move the camera depending on the lighting here. All right, hopefully you guys can see those numbers okay. Unstable. Oh, it didn't like that I was moving while I was doing it. Just make sure we got a really good clean start on this. It's probably fine, but better safe than sorry on this one. All right, so we're set to grams here on this scale. The little bowl we have here is 35.3 grams. I'm kind of curious as to if these are the same. Well, they're slightly different. Manufacturing and wear and tear. All right. So 35.29. So it has the scale. I mean, it's an inexpensive scale, and it actually is really has amazing replicability. So it'll give you the same measurement over and over again. It's very stable. I really have been thrilled with these. They were like, I don't remember, 10, 12 bucks, something like that. So very good. So I'm just shaking our cure packet here. We've got 2 different colored bowls because we're going to keep it separate for the meats so that we use the amount of salt that we want to season our meat properly. or what we've determined to be properly. And we're going to start off with our curing salt for the 8.5 pound. And you can see how this salt is actually dyed pink, so it might be a little harder to see in the bowl than I had initially thought. But we need to make sure we're starting from 0. Okay, so some came out. We might be just a hair high, but this shouldn't be bad. Okay, it does not take much, but a few very gentle taps of the packet. Look at that. We're so high. I have to take a little out. Well, there's much finer granules than I'm used to working with. Okay. Just going to tap it and see where the scale settles a couple of times. And we're at 1.07 to 1.06. You can see the pink color of that salt. That's so you don't accidentally use it as table salt. About 4 grams of sodium nitrite is lethal, so don't consume all that at once. So, and you can see at these fine measurements, even if I move around here a little bit, we're changing the scale just by breathing and being. So we're going to make sure we're in that ballpark. It looks like plus or minus a little bit. And so you just do what you can to be as close as you can with what you've got. In this case, I would rather be just a tiny bit over that number than a tiny bit under it, because we're on the lower half of the range that we want to be in. The 0.6 would be cutting our 21.25 by 1/10 as opposed to 1/20. So that would make this about 2.12, right? 2.12 as opposed to 1.06. So I mean, we're definitely close to that level of nitrite that we're looking for, but we're not anywhere near the top end of that scale yet. So there is some leeway, but I'd rather be a hair above the number as opposed to a hair below the number. So now we're going to take our kosher salt. I've already opened the box and I've bent the little tab here, which makes them so much easier to actually get open. So yay for that. So now what we're going to do, in case we need to scoop a little of this back out or somewhere, I'm just going to shuffle all of our pink curing salt over to one corner. All right, so one edge. And that will kind of keep us in the ballpark. And now we're going to come up to, I'll stop a little and early and let the scale adjust. 21.25. We're at 21.5. I'm content with that. As far as our measurements. If we wanted to, because we've got a pile of white salt, we can actually come in here and we can just pick off the white salt and not get any of the pink in that, and that should keep our levels the same. So just as an example, we can come in here and we can do just that. And then this, because there might be trace amounts of nitrate, whatever, we're just going to throw out this little bit of salt that we pinched off, but you can see how much that was to make that difference in the scale. So my hand comes near it and it shifts. So yeah. So anyway, that's about where we want to be with our and every time you make an adjustment, give it a second for the scale to settle. Okay. So that's where we want to be for our large piece of meat, the 8.5 pounds, 8.5 pounds there. And so we're going to bring in our second bowl. And if there's a granule on top of the scale, it won't make a difference here because we're about to take our bowl, press the magical tare function to make sure we start at 0. Now this one will need 0.76 of the pink curing salt. So here we go. This one could be tricky because it doesn't take much to bring those numbers up. Whoa, got crazy on that. All right, so remember, we want to be between 0.76 and the high end of our nitrite scale here, we would want to, the high end would be about 1.4, 1.5. So even though we're still well within it, I would like to keep my nitrites down to a minimum in my meat curing process here. So holy moly, getting this back out of there is tricky with such a small pile. Okay. Okay. 0.76. Nobody breathe, nobody move. Okay, we're going to just tap the scale once or twice and see where it settles to make sure that we're with the replicability of the scale, we are showing back up at about the same number. And we must be close enough to the middle that we are actually getting several times the same number in a row here. That looks great. Well, can't ask for better than that. I'm pretty pleased with myself. 0.76. We're going to take the salt that we took from out of the previous one. We're just going to use it in here. All right, waste not, want not, right? All right, and then we're going to take our kosher salt and out of the box and just continue adding more in. What are we going to? We're going to 15.25. How's that for darn close? So I'm just going to pour a little bit in my hand so I have better control, and we're going to take a granule. There's literally one granule of kosher salt. 2. This is out of my own curiosity. 3, 4. Just need to reset all the scale. It wasn't picking up such small changes, so it wasn't re-measuring itself. 15.26. Wow. All right. Pretty pleased with that. And our tiny bit of salt that was left over. We're just going to throw that guy away. So believe it or not, the plan here is for 6 pounds of meat. This is all the salt that we're using. All right. That's it. That does not look like much salt as I'm staring at it. I'm kind of feeling a little nervous. There's pink curing salts in there. And so actually what we're going to do is we're going to stir these up and mix them well before we actually put them to use. But that is our salt for each of these. Now we also have some other ingredients here. We have a little fennel, and so I've got some fennel root that I've chopped up, and just a little bit of the greens thrown on top there. I like the flavor of fennel root, especially when it bakes into a nice gamey meat like buffalo. Very good with bison. So got it measured out for our 6 pounds of meat, and for our 8.5 pounds of meat, I just roughly divided those so that we can get started with the rest of our seasonings, and we're going to talk about that in the next video.